The millionaire pushed open the door of the damp storage room and froze at the sight before him. His 7-year-old mute daughter was sitting on the dirty floor, one hand clutching a bowl of foul-smelling porridge, while the other picked at scattered vegetables and carrots strewn across the ground. The stepmother's voice pierced the room, sharp and merciless. "Eat every last bit of it." Tears streamed down the girl's face, yet her throat swelled shut, unable to release a single sound. But what was even more horrifying was yet to come. Before we begin, please leave a comment about this story and give us a score from 1 to 10. Are you doing okay? If there is anything you would like to share, I am always here to listen. I wish you moments of reflection as you follow this healing journey of courage and justice. The black Porsche stopped at the stone-paved driveway leading into the Carter family's grand estate on the outskirts of New York. David Carter, 42 years old, stepped out of the car. His light gray suit remained perfectly pressed after the long flight from Los Angeles. The man, a wealthy real estate millionaire, still carried his usual composure, but a trace of exhaustion lingered in his eyes. It had been 7 years since the car accident that took the life of the woman he loved most. The accident happened while he was behind the wheel. That guilt had never left him. At that time, his daughter, little Elena, had just been born. She came into the world premature, frail, and with a congenital speech impairment. David adored his daughter beyond words, yet he never truly knew how to step into her silent world. He chose to provide her with everything, building a luxurious home, hiring tutors, sending her to the best schools. But the gap between father and daughter remained. Today, after a month-long business trip, he decided to come home early without telling anyone. He wanted to surprise Elena, hoping to see one of her rare smiles when he opened the door. But the house was unnervingly quiet. No small footsteps came running. No tiny arms wrapped around him. David set his briefcase down on the table, unbuttoned his suit jacket, and walked slowly down the hallway. The strange stillness made his heart beat faster. He called softly, "Elena, where are you?" There were no footsteps like before, only a suffocating silence. Suddenly, a shrill sound pierced the air, coming from the back of the house, from an old storage shed long abandoned. The harsh echo sliced through the air like a blade. It was the voice of Rachel, the woman he had married a year ago. Rachel Reynolds, young, skillful, outwardly gentle. She knew how to win people's hearts, and she seemed especially attentive to Elena. In his loneliness, David thought he had found a way out. He married Rachel, not out of love, but in the hope that his daughter would have a mother figure. Yet now, that voice made him freeze and frown. Her furious words hit him straight in the chest. "Eat! Finish it or you won't be allowed out, you stupid mute. Watching you eat is no different than watching a pig, Elena." David rushed toward the back, his shoes pounding urgently against the wooden floor. He shoved open the heavy door that led to the shed standing apart at the rear of the garden. The rotting wood groaned as it swung open. What he saw froze his blood. His daughter, Elena, sat curled up on the cold ground, her hair tangled, her eyes swollen red. In her trembling little hands she held a shriveled carrot, while the other clutched a bowl of watery porridge. In front of her stood Rachel, wearing a tight red dress, her face distorted by rage, her finger pointed down at the child as if issuing a command. Elena tried to lift the piece of carrot to her lips, but pulled back, releasing only a faint, stifled sound. Her eyes never dared to look up, fixed instead on the dirty ground beneath her. Rachel sniffed sharply and used the tip of her shoe to shove the bowl of porridge until it spilled over the edge. Her voice ground out each word. "Make sure you lick that bowl clean, you hear me?" She grabbed Elena's chin, forcing the little girl's face down close to the bowl, her teeth clenched. "Swallow it all. I'll count to 3. If you don't finish, you're sleeping here tonight." Rachel tapped the spoon against the edge of the bowl with a sharp clink, pointing her finger inches from Elena's face. "Open your eyes and look at the mess you made in my house. Eat faster, useless child. Don't make me teach you another way." David's breath caught, his throat dry as sand. The weight in his chest pressed down so heavily it felt as if it would split him apart. His voice broke out, low and powerful. "Stop it, Rachel. What the hell are you doing? How can you treat my daughter like this?" The sound jolted Rachel, freezing her in place. In an instant, the ferocity drained from her face, replaced by a trembling, theatrical weakness. She turned, eyes glistening with fake regret. Her voice softened, thin and forced. I only wanted what's best for her. I just wanted her to eat properly. You misunderstood. David's fist tightened. He looked at his daughter. Elena lifted her head, her tear-filled eyes shimmering. Inside them was fear, but also a fragile flicker of hope, as if she was pleading with him to believe. The room went utterly silent. David stood motionless, unsure how to respond. Rachel panted heavily, then all at once placed a hand on her stomach. Her voice dropped, shaky and whispering, "I'm 2 months pregnant." The words fell like a blade, cutting straight through David's thoughts. David stood silent for a long time after Rachel's words. His breath felt heavy, as if a stone were pressing against his chest. Elena was still sitting on the floor of the storage room, her small hands clutching a wilted carrot as if it were the only thing she could hold on to. David bent down and lifted his daughter into his arms. The child flinched slightly, then pressed her cheek against his shoulder, her body trembling. Rachel watched them, her eyes glistening with a false shine, one hand resting on her stomach. "Next time you must not shout or force her to eat things like this again. Let's just go inside," David said softly, his voice hoarse. In the wide, brightly lit kitchen, the faint smell of roasted meat lingered. Rachel quickly regained her composure. She placed a plate of food on the table and sighed. "Maybe I was too impatient. You know how pregnant women's moods can be unpredictable." David didn't answer. He pulled out a chair and sat Elena next to him. The girl shrank back, lowering her head toward the table, not touching the food. Rachel poured orange juice slowly, then placed the glass in front of David, her gaze feigning care. "You have to trust me. I just want Elena to eat properly. Look at her. She is so thin, how can I not be worried?" David looked at his daughter. Elena quietly pushed pieces of meat to the edge of her plate, her hands trembling slightly. He leaned down and whispered, his voice low enough for only her to hear. "Aren't you hungry?" Elena shook her head, her eyes brimming with tears, then quickly picked up a piece of vegetable and put it into her mouth when she noticed Rachel watching. Rachel smiled faintly and added, "See, I only want her to be healthy." David clenched his hand on the table. The images from the storage room still haunted him. His heart ached for his daughter, but he had no solid proof yet to tear away Rachel's mask. He feared that even the smallest mistake might bring Elena more suffering. Sitting in the corner of the kitchen, a young woman quietly cleared the dishes. She was Grace Miller, the new housemaid. Grace was in her 20s, with a gentle face and a slender build. She spoke little, and usually worked silently. David happened to catch Grace's eyes on Elena, a glimmer of worry flashing there before she quickly lowered her head and returned to washing the dishes. He noticed, but said nothing. Dinner passed under a heavy silence. Every clink of fork and knife against porcelain sounded like it was tearing the air apart. David chewed each piece of meat, but his taste seemed numb. Elena ate very little, just a few tiny bites. Rachel kept smiling, occasionally stroking the child's hair in front of her husband. But Elena's eyes dropped, avoiding that touch. When she finished clearing the table, Rachel walked over, wrapped her arm around David's shoulder, and spoke softly. "Please don't be upset with me. I only want our family to have peace. As long as you trust me, everything will be fine." David removed her hand, his eyes thoughtful. "I want to rest early. Tomorrow there is still much to do." Night fell, and the house sank once again into silence. David stood in the hallway, gently closing Elena's bedroom door. Inside, the little girl had curled up on the bed, the dim yellow nightlight casting a weary glow over her face. He held the doorknob tightly, a wave of both tenderness and helplessness rising in his chest. A while later, while he was in the study, a faint sound stirred in the hallway. David looked up, stepped out, and stopped when he saw Rachel quietly pulling Elena by the hand. The child kept her head down, her small feet dragging with each step. They were heading toward the storage room. David followed, stopping at the back door. His hand gripped the doorframe so tightly that the veins stood out. In his mind echoed the shouts from earlier that afternoon when Rachel had forced the girl to eat. Yet he remained still. His heart pounded furiously. His chest felt like it would burst. Part of him wanted to rush forward and stop it, but another part feared that if he acted too quickly, Rachel would find another excuse to twist the truth, and everything would be buried again. He closed his eyes and drew in a deep breath. The faint creak of the storage door echoed, then faded away. The backyard returned to silence. David leaned against the wall, his hand trembling. He felt like a coward, letting his daughter walk into the darkness once more. The next morning, while Elena was changing clothes to get ready for school, David happened to touch the pocket of her old sweater. Something fell out. He bent down and picked it up. It was a rotten, wilted vegetable leaf with a sharp, pungent smell. David stood frozen, his fingers tightening around the small piece of vegetable. His heart ached. The child had tried to hide it, like a silent piece of evidence sent to her father. David stared at the leaf in his hand, then looked at Elena. For the first time in many years, he felt his daughter was crying out to him for help, not with words, but with these haunting little traces she left behind. David sat motionless for a long time, the rotten leaf of lettuce in his hand like a silent piece of evidence, pushing him toward a truth he could no longer avoid. The morning dragged on slowly. He stepped out of his study, searching for his daughter. Elena was sitting in the living room, her small figure swallowed by the large chair. Her face was pale, her eyes shadowed with dark circles, her hands nervously playing with the edge of her dress as if to hide her worry. David walked closer and sat down across from her. He remembered the counseling sessions in the past, when the doctor had suggested he learn a few simple signs to communicate with his daughter. He slowly raised his hand, signing each word. "Are you okay?" Elena looked up, her eyes wide. She gave a faint smile, her lips trembling as if she wanted to respond. But in that instant, the sound of Rachel's heels echoed in the hallway. The door opened. Elena's gaze went dark, her smile vanished, and her hands tightened. Rachel entered carrying a tray of fruit. She glanced briefly at David, then set the tray on the table, her voice light as a breeze. "I think Elena needs more vitamins. Lately, she's been looking so weak." David said nothing. He sat still, watching Elena lower her head, her face tense. That afternoon, as David was preparing to leave for an appointment, the doorbell rang. He went to open it and was met with a familiar sight. Mrs. Linda Green, the neighbor from across the street. She was in her 60s, her silver hair neatly pinned up, her thin frame still spry. She was well known for her kindness, always thoughtful, often bringing over baked goods. "Hello, David," she smiled, holding a basket of warm apple pies. "I haven't seen you home in a while, so I thought I'd stop by. And I have to say, you're very lucky to have a wife like Rachel. She's such a role model, hardworking. Everyone in the neighborhood praises her." David hesitated, forcing a polite smile. "Thank you, please come in." Rachel appeared almost instantly, her bright smile glowing as she reached to take the basket. She wrapped an arm around Elena's shoulders, pulling the girl close, her voice honeyed with sweetness. "She really loves your apple pies. Thank you so much, Mrs. Green." Elena stood stiffly in Rachel's embrace, her eyes blinked rapidly, as if she were trying to swallow every bit of fear inside her. Linda smiled with satisfaction, suspecting nothing. After a few pleasantries, she left, the faint aroma of baked goods lingering in the air. As soon as the door closed, Rachel bent down, brought her lips close to Elena's ear, and whispered in a low but icy voice, "If you utter a single word, I will keep you in the storage room for an entire week. Remember that." Elena trembled, her lips pressed tightly together. She did not dare look at her father, only lowered her head and hurried up to her room. David stood nearby, catching fragments of Rachel's tone. He could not make out every word, but it was enough for him to sense that something was terribly wrong. His chest grew heavy. That night, David returned late to his study. As he opened his leather briefcase to take out some documents, a small slip of paper fell from the pocket of his coat. He picked it up and unfolded it. Childlike scribbles came into view. A storage room, a locked door, and inside, a small figure sitting curled up. David's hand shook, his eyes fixed on the paper. He did not need anyone to explain. This was not a random drawing from a child. This was a cry for help from his own daughter. He sank into the chair, the note resting in the palm of his hand. The simple drawing pierced him like a needle straight to the chest. His heart clenched, and a storm of anguish surged within. For the first time, David felt it with absolute clarity. He no longer had the right to remain silent. David looked down at his daughter's desperate note, his eyes reddening. A fierce resolve stirred inside him, knowing the truth could no longer be buried. He placed it on the desk, then stood up and walked quickly toward the security room at the end of the hallway. His hand unlocked the door, and the screen lights flared in the dark room. A series of camera images appeared. David scrolled back through the recorded footage. Just a few minutes later, he froze. On the screen, Rachel was gripping Elena's arm tightly, dragging the girl toward the storage room. Elena struggled weakly, then was shoved hard inside. David leaned closer, replaying another section in slow motion. In the dim corner of the storage room, Elena was curled up against the wall. She trembled, her small hands tracing letters into the dusty floor. When he zoomed in, the words became clear. Help. David's chest tightened. He sat motionless, covering his face with his hand. A surge of love for his daughter rose alongside a storm of rage and guilt. He had been blind for too long, leaving his child to carve out her own desperate cry in the darkness. The following afternoon, David summoned Grace Miller, the young housemaid barely in her 20s, into his study. Grace rarely spoke, her thin face and downcast eyes avoiding direct stares. Since Rachel had hired her, David had paid little attention, but today he realized that Grace's timidity was not only a matter of personality. David laid a sketch of the storage room in front of her, his voice deliberate. Grace, I want the truth. What has Elena endured in this house? Grace flinched, taking a step back. She lowered her face, clutching the hem of her blouse in both hands. After a long pause, she shook her head. Sir, I can't say. If I do, I'll lose my job. I still have an elderly mother to support. David was silent, his gaze steady. He placed his hand firmly on the desk, his voice dropping lower. You are not the only one afraid, but I am her father, and I am not allowed to be afraid anymore. At those words, Grace trembled. Tears suddenly welled in her eyes. She pulled her phone from her pocket, opened an audio recording, and placed it on the desk. Rachel's voice burst forth, sharp and piercing. This mute child is nothing but a burden. I will not let her stand in my way. David sat in stunned silence, each word cut into his heart like a blade. He closed his eyes, fighting to contain his fury. When he opened them again, there was no longer any trace of hesitation. Grace sobbed, her words spilling out like a plea. I once saw the little girl locked up for 3 straight days. I wanted to report it, but I was afraid. I was truly terrified. David stepped closer and gently placed a hand on Grace's shoulder. He let out a heavy sigh, his voice hoarse but steady. Thank you. Don't blame yourself. From now on, let me do the part that belongs to a father. That night, David stood at the door of Elena's room. Through the narrow crack, he saw his daughter asleep, her gaunt face half buried in messy hair. He tightened his grip on the phone that kept replaying Rachel's voice, his chest swelling with a resolve he had never known before. He whispered, as if speaking straight to his own heart, I promise. This time I will not abandon you. Clutching the recording evidence in his hand, David fixed his eyes on Elena as she slept and took the first step into the real battle ahead. David stood outside his daughter's room for a long time. When he finally walked away, his steps were heavy, but there was a new firmness in his eyes. The next morning, he put on his coat, stepped out of the house, and began asking questions around the neighborhood. The first person he went to see was Anna Mitchell, who had worked as a housekeeper for his family many years ago. Mrs. Anna was in her 50s, full-figured, with a kind face. When David appeared at her door, she looked surprised but quickly invited him in. David did not waste words. He asked directly, Mrs. Anna, during the time you worked here, did you notice anything unusual with Elena? Anna froze. Her eyes wavered. After a moment, she sighed. Mr. David, I still remember one time. Elena had been left without food the whole day. The poor child sat in the kitchen holding her stomach, her lips turning purple. When I gave her some bread, Rachel saw it and became furious, saying I had overstepped my duties. After that, I quit. I didn't dare interfere any further. Hearing this, David felt his chest tighten. He gave a small nod and thanked her. That afternoon, he stopped by the home of Robert Hayes, the electrician who had once repaired the wiring at the mansion. Robert was about 40, with sun-darkened skin and a raspy voice from years of smoking. When David asked, Robert was silent for a moment, then spoke in a low tone. "I can't say for sure, but when I was fixing the wiring in the storage room, I heard muffled crying inside. It was faint, like someone had covered the sound. I thought it was strange, but Rachel told me it was just an old television. I didn't want trouble, so I let it go." David clenched his fist. Those words were like another piece of the puzzle snapping into place, forcing him to confront the truth he could no longer ignore. By the end of the day, David went to the elementary school to meet Olivia Scott, Elena's homeroom teacher. Olivia was about 30, her brown hair tied neatly back, her eyes clear and serious. When she heard David's question, she pulled a folder from her drawer and set it in front of him. "Mr. Carter, I've written many notes. Elena has been losing weight rapidly, often sits absent-minded, and struggles to concentrate. I sent several reports about her health to the family, but the one who always responded was Mrs. Rachel. She insisted Elena was just a picky eater, nothing serious." David flipped through the pages, his eyes burning. Everything he had heard throughout the day seemed to converge into a single point, pushing him past the line of no return. That evening, dinner was heavy with silence. Rachel sat across from him, one hand resting lightly on her belly, her gaze soft but her words calculated. "David, I do everything for this family. You cannot let the baby I'm carrying go without." David looked at his daughter. Elena kept her head down, picking at small bites of food like a fading shadow. He turned back to Rachel, anger flickering in his restrained voice. "If you truly care about this family, then why is Elena so thin?" Rachel hesitated for a moment, then smiled softly, her voice lowered as if to soothe. "She is a picky eater and very sensitive. The doctor also said this stage requires gentle monitoring. I still try to cook according to her own special diet, so please don't worry too much." The air was thick. The only sound was the faint clink of a spoon against the plate. David stayed silent, but inside him the storm was raging. The next morning, as soon as he stepped into his study, Rachel knocked lightly on the door before walking in. In her hands was a neatly bound folder. She placed it on the desk and smiled with calm composure. "I just went for a checkup. This is the prenatal examination certificate, fully verified with an official seal. I want you to feel at ease." David picked it up, his eyes fixed on the bright red circular stamp. His heart sank, a quiet unease spreading through him. He realized everything was being arranged so carefully, as if it were a calculated game of chess. He sat still, his hand trembling slightly on the edge of the paper. Behind Rachel's gentle demeanor, he heard the faint click of the door closing, like the sound of a chess piece placed deliberately on the board. David set down the file Rachel had just handed him and took a deep breath to steady himself. He buttoned his suit jacket, then walked toward the living room. The doorbell rang with a short chime. Rachel was already waiting. She opened the door as if she had prepared for this moment. A man in his mid-40s stepped inside. His black suit fit neatly, his dark tie matched his reserved demeanor, and his polite smile carried a chill. Rachel's voice was light, almost casual. "This is Victor Hale, an attorney. He can give our family legal advice." David gave a courteous nod. He had not yet responded when another figure appeared on the video screen of the computer sitting on the dining table. Rachel turned the monitor toward David. "And this is Dr. Gregory Collins, a child psychologist. He has assisted with many similar cases." On the screen was a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair and glasses. His voice was even neither warm nor cold. "Good evening, Mr. Carter. I have reviewed the school health notes and some behavioral descriptions provided by the Guardian. I suspect Elena may be struggling with emotional regulation disorder combined with avoidance of social interaction. My temporary recommendation is to remove her from any stimulating environment." David looked directly into the camera. "You have never met the child," Collins shrugged. "In the initial stage, an indirect assessment is valid. Later, we can arrange a direct session if the family agrees." Victor sat down in a chair, opened his briefcase, and pulled out a folder. "From a legal standpoint, if there is a medical recommendation, the family can establish a guardianship plan for in-home treatment. Assets, custody, Everything will be more secure if we follow the proper process." Rachel poured the water, her voice gentle and skillfully measured. "I only want Elena to receive proper treatment. I am pregnant too, so I am very afraid of risks." David looked at her slowly. He pulled out a chair and sat beside Elena. The girl sat upright, her hands clasped together. Her face was pale, but her eyes followed every word the adults spoke. Dinner was served out of obligation. No one cared to eat. Rachel slid a stack of papers toward David. "These are the preliminary results. Elena has a psychological disorder. She needs to be isolated." David set his spoon down, his voice low and firm. "She only needs to be loved." Rachel smiled, but the smile never touched her eyes. "You are blind. If you keep going like this, you will lose both your child and your fortune." Elena stirred slightly. She placed her small hand on her father's, touched her own chest, then shook her head. Slowly and clumsily, she traced a few simple signs David had learned. It was enough for him to understand. "I am not sick." David looked down at her hand resting on his own. For the first time, he truly heard that silent voice. It went straight into his chest, not through any piece of paper. Victor cut in, his tone soft but pressing. "Mr. Carter, my advice is not to turn this into a battle. If you just sign the consent for treatment, everything will go smoothly. Later, the records will show you as a responsible father." David turned toward the screen. "Dr. Collins, can you meet with Elena right now, through video?" Collins shook his head slightly. "A remote evaluation with a child who has communication difficulties cannot be considered reliable. It is best to follow the plan that has been proposed." Rachel placed her hand on her stomach and exhaled softly. "Listen to them. They only want what is best for the family." David looked at Elena. He remembered the harsh recording from the other day. He remembered the word help written in the dust. He remembered the scrap of paper with the crooked scrawl. He tightened his grip on his daughter's hand, just a little, as if making a promise. Rachel seized the moment and pushed another stack of papers onto the table. The pages were thick, marked with a bright red stamp. "These are the updated pregnancy documents, and this is the consent form for Elena's treatment. Doing both at once will settle everything. All you need to do is sign. I will handle the rest." David lifted his head and looked straight at her. "Why has Elena lost weight so quickly?" Rachel did not blink. "She is a picky eater, I have told you many times. Besides, psychological conditions often come with changes in appetite." Elena squeezed her father's hand tighter. She signed again, slower now, more certain. David repeated aloud, speaking for her. "She is not sick." Victor leaned back in his chair, fingers interlaced. "Mr. Carter, you are letting your emotions interfere with a medical decision. What you need to do is very simple. Sign." David turned to Collins. "If I refuse," Collins remained calm, "you have the right. But if Elena behaves in a way that endangers herself, the family could be considered negligent. That would be very unfavorable if there is ever a dispute later." The room was so silent it swallowed every sound. David could hear his daughter's breathing clearly. He placed the file down, not rushing to hand it back. In his mind, a door had just opened, a door that meant he had to face it, had to act, had to bring everything into the light. Rachel noticed his silence, leaned closer, and softened her tone. "Make your choice, a sick child or a whole new family." David looked at his daughter, then at Rachel's flawless smile. He did not sign. He simply closed the folder, sliding it to the edge of the table, as if setting a stone down in the middle of a chessboard. Rachel kept smiling. She pulled the stack of falsified pregnancy papers back toward herself, patting the cover lightly as though signaling that everything was ready. "Make your choice," she repeated, her voice steady as before. "Tonight." Elena did not withdraw her hand. Her small palm still rested on her father's hand. David looked down, gave the slightest nod, as though answering his daughter before answering anyone else. He raised his head to meet Rachel's gaze. It was not yet an answer, only a look. But in that look, the game had already shifted. David closed the file folder and stood up. He walked straight into the hallway, his hand still lightly holding Elena's, as if to tell her that he was right there. Dinner shattered into the lonely sound of clinking silverware, while Rachel sat still, her eyes following them as if she were measuring every breath. The next morning, Rachel began to tighten her control over everything. Elena's bedroom door stayed locked for longer. Her garden time was cut. The child's meals returned to the same bland plate of vegetables. Rachel spoke to Linda Green at the gate with a syrupy voice, saying that Elena was on a medical nutrition plan and that she herself was tired from her pregnancy, asking the neighbor to excuse the crying from the therapy if she heard it. Linda nodded with a look of pity. Rachel's sweet words slipped over the fence like a fresh coat of paint, shiny and leaving no trace to hold on to. Inside the house, Rachel called Grace Miller into the kitchen. The door had barely closed when her voice dropped, thin and cold. "Who did you talk to yesterday?" Grace startled, her hands twisting together. "Ma'am, I was only doing my work." "Then keep working. If I hear one more word slip out, you won't need to come back tomorrow morning. Your contract is paper thin." Grace lowered her head, her lips pressed tightly. As she passed David in the hallway, she gave him the quickest glance. Just a glance. But it was enough for him to understand that fear had already taken over even the adults. Night fell. David waited until Rachel went into the bathroom. He opened Elena's door as quietly as he could. The little girl was sitting on the floor, a thin notebook in front of her. With trembling hands, she had drawn a storage room, a locked door, and a woman in a red dress standing in the way. The red had been scribbled over and over, so dark it had scratched the paper. David knelt down to meet her eyes. "What do you want to tell me, sweetheart?" Elena nodded. She touched the pencil to the lock, then to the red dress, then put it down and threw her arms around him. Her small body trembled, her breaths short and fast. David held her close, not letting go until her breathing began to slow. He saw how her fear had poured into the drawing, and also the tiny determination trying to find a path into the light. The door burst open. Rachel stood there, her eyes darting quickly to the floor. She stepped forward, yanked the notebook out of Elena's hands. The sound of ripping paper tore through the air. Scraps fell onto the carpet. "You dare betray me?" Elena jolted, both hands clutching her chest. David stood in front of his daughter, his voice low but steady. "That's enough, Rachel." Rachel narrowed her eyes, her lips curling into a mocking smirk. She tossed the notebook cover into the trash and turned her back. At that moment, the doorbell rang, insistent and sharp. David went to answer. On the porch stood a Latina woman in her early 30s, slim, her gaze clear and composed. She held out a badge. "I'm Detective Maria Santos, County Police Department. I need to discuss a report concerning child safety." The complaint was filed by Elena's homeroom teacher, Olivia Scott. From the living room, Rachel appeared, her smile flashing instantly. "There must be some misunderstanding. I'm pregnant, and under a lot of stress. Maybe someone overheard something the wrong way." Maria's expression didn't change. Her voice was even and polite. "I'll listen to everything, in proper order. First, I want to meet Elena and her legal guardian. Right now." The air froze. David stepped aside to let her in. Elena stood behind him, her eyes wide open. Outside, the night swallowed every sound. Inside, another door was opening. David leaned aside to make room, pulling out a chair so Elena could sit next to him, while Detective Maria Santos opened her notebook, placed a small recorder on the table, and began asking short, clear questions. She reviewed the camera footage David had extracted, listened to the audio of Rachel's voice, then scheduled follow-up meetings with Elena's school and the neighbors mentioned. The meeting ended with one decisive statement from Maria: "I will petition the judge to open an emergency hearing." 2 days later, the Manhattan Family Court convened under expedited procedure. Judge Patricia Coleman presided, a woman in her early 50s with a calm, steady voice. Representing the petitioner was David Carter, accompanied by attorney Michael Turner, a composed middle-aged man well known for defending children's rights. On the opposing side was Rachel Reynolds with Victor Hale, whose face remained cold and guarded, a thick binder of files stacked behind them. In the witness section sat Detective Maria Santos, holding sealed documents and a memory card containing the videos. The clerk called the case, and everyone took their seats. Judge Coleman glanced across both sides and spoke briefly. "We are here to determine the child's safety and address emergency requests. No wandering arguments. Focus on evidence. Victor stepped forward, laying printed documents on the table. Your Honor, my client is pregnant, and she is bearing the burden of care. The child exhibits isolation, refuses to communicate, and may be a danger to herself. We submit Dr. Gregory Collins's recommendation for limiting exposure to stimulating environments. Turner moved forward, adjusted his glasses, his voice not raised yet resonant. Your Honor, how can a 7-year-old be dangerous to anyone except through the cruelty of adults? We object to this filing because it relies on indirect evaluation and conflicts with objective evidence. Judge Coleman gave a small nod. Detective Santos, please proceed. Maria stepped forward, presenting a USB and certified copies. Your Honor, this is footage extracted from the home security system. The video shows the defendant repeatedly pulling young Elena into the storage area, keeping her there for extended periods. In one scene, the child writes the word "help" in the dust on the floor. In addition, this is an audio file capturing the defendant's voice yelling insults and threats. The audio was played briefly. Rachel's words rang out, harsh and metallic. This mute girl is nothing but a burden. I will not let her stand in my way. The courtroom fell silent. Judge Coleman turned toward Victor. Response? Victor cleared his throat. The recording could have been edited. And even if it is my client's voice, it was a moment of frustration during pregnancy. As for the video, we contend that was a temporary treatment area under instruction. Turner did not yield ground. Your Honor, please note that the defendant has never allowed the child to be examined directly by an independent physician. The only evaluation submitted comes from a doctor who based his opinions solely on her descriptions. We have statements from Miss Olivia Scott, the teacher, Mr. Robert Hayes, the electrician, and Mrs. Anna Mitchell, the former housekeeper. All describe signs of exhaustion, hearing the child's cries from the storage room, and reports of deliberate withholding of food. Judge Coleman skimmed through the reports, then turned to David. What do you want to say, Mr. Carter? David stood up, his hands clasped together, his voice hoarse but steady. I already lost my wife. I cannot lose my child again. I was slow, and I take responsibility for that delay, but I will not let my daughter live in fear any longer. Rachel smirked and tilted her head with disdain. Victor placed a hand on her shoulder, reminding her to stay calm. Turner gestured for David to sit down, then turned back to the evidence table. Your Honor, we request an emergency protection order for Elena, temporarily restricting the defendant's contact, and the appointment of an independent psychological evaluation by a doctor chosen by the court. We also request that the areas described as treatment storage be sealed for inspection. Judge Coleman looked toward Elena. Do you want to say anything, Elena? Elena sat beside her father, back straight, eyes lifted to the judge. She picked up the small sheet of paper Turner had placed before her, holding the pen with both hands to steady her trembling. Each letter appeared slowly and unevenly, but clearly. She looked up and handed the paper to the clerk. Judge Coleman took it and read aloud, his voice deliberate so everyone could hear. I trust my dad. A long silence followed. Maria lowered her head, swallowing her emotion. David placed a hand on his daughter's shoulder, just a light touch, but warm. Victor tried to pull the momentum back his way. Your Honor, a note scribbled by a child cannot serve as a legal foundation. We have medical records, treatment recommendations, and proof of the defendant's pregnancy. The family needs stability. Turner replied immediately. We question the authenticity of the pregnancy records. We request permission to verify the origin of the seal and the history of the electronic files. At the same time, we ask the court to recognize the defendant's attempts at manipulating the community. Judge Coleman tapped the gavel lightly. The court will issue a temporary decision after a preliminary review of the medical records and verification of the storage devices. In the meantime, Elena will remain with her father, and all forms of isolation imposed by the defendant are suspended. The police will inspect the warehouse today. The gavel struck again. No one dared breathe loudly. Suddenly, Rachel shot to her feet, her chair crashing behind her with a sharp crack. Her face shifted color, and her words lashed out like a whip. You will have nothing left if I fall. The courtroom froze. Rachel's eyes locked on Elena, sharp and dark. Elena flinched, clutching tightly at her father's sleeve. David instinctively leaned over to shield her. Judge Coleman frowned, hand lifting the gavel. Detective Maria Santos was already on her feet, her eyes tracking every move, ready to intervene. At the edge of the courtroom, everyone seemed to hold their breath, waiting to see which string would snap first. The gavel had not struck again when Detective Maria Santos stepped forward, raising her hand for permission. She placed a new USB drive on the evidence table, her voice clear. "Your Honor, we have just received the extracted data from the defendant's phone under an emergency search warrant. There is a 3-minute recording of a conversation between Mrs. Rachel Reynolds, attorney Victor Hale, and Dr. Gregory Collins." Judge Patricia Coleman nodded. The clerk played the recording. The sound rang out cold and unmistakable. Rachel's voice, "I need a file showing that the girl cannot control her behavior. Gregory, you write in the recommendations section, environmental isolation." Collins's voice, low and slow, "I have not examined her directly." Rachel chuckled softly. "Only need your signature. I will take care of the rest." Victor's voice cut in, steady and calculating. "Also a pregnancy certificate. With that paper, you will be given priority for family stability. I will prepare the guardianship form." Rachel's tone dropped, each word biting. "Once the transfer is signed, this house is mine. David can't do anything anymore." A short silence, then Rachel's voice again, sharper. "If social services come, Sheriff Dalton will block them. He knows what community support means," the courtroom murmured. Victor sprang to his feet. "Objection. This recording could have been doctored." Maria slid another folder onto the table. "Attached here is the transfer history, from the defendant's account to intermediary accounts tied to Dr. Collins and Mr. Victor's office. In addition, there is a chain of cash transactions linked to Sheriff Harold Dalton. Sheriff Dalton, the county sheriff, has now been taken into custody by the Integrity Division for questioning." Judge Coleman looked directly at Victor. "Do you wish to add anything?" Victor swallowed hard. "Your Honor, my client may." The side door opened. A young prosecutor in a gray suit stepped inside, introducing herself briefly. "I am Assistant District Attorney Lucy Graham. The District Attorney's Office has initiated a separate criminal investigation outside of this family court proceeding. A temporary arrest warrant for Gregory Collins has been signed. Our office has also summoned Mr. Devon, Victor Hale, to clarify his role in facilitating falsified documents." The air grew heavy. David clenched his fists, his eyes locked on Elena. Rachel's face drained of color for a moment, then flushed red. She slammed her hand against the table. "Without me, you are nothing, David." Her voice shattered like glass. The courtroom erupted, and then fell silent. David stepped half a pace forward, shielding Elena behind him. Judge Coleman struck the gavel. "Order." Turner stepped up, his voice steady and low. "Your Honor, we submit the audio recording as evidence showing the scheme to seize the estate and the fabricated pregnancy." Rachel gave a short, bitter laugh. "Fabricated pregnancy? Do you think I'm stupid?" Maria answered with calm precision. "The hospital records confirm there is no pregnancy information. What you presented was just a printed form with a copied seal. The Department of Health has issued a written response." Victor lowered his head, saying nothing. In the back row, a court officer was already waiting. Turner leaned toward David, whispering so softly it was barely audible. "Breathe in. Stand firm." David knelt down to Elena's level. He raised both hands, slowly signing. "I'm sorry." He paused, then signed again. "I love you." Elena looked at her father, her eyes brimming with tears. She trembled, then broke into sobs, but did not step back anymore. She reached for the blank sheet Turner had placed there, held the pen with both hands. This time her handwriting was no longer shaky, the letters straight and resolute. She looked up, handed the paper to the judge, then turned and gave another page to David. The same words, clear and complete. "I trust you, Dad." David took the paper, his hand covering half the line, as though protecting a treasure. He exhaled, long but light. On the witness bench, Maria pressed her lips together, her eyes ablaze. ADA Lucy gave a slight nod, marking something in her notebook. Judge Coleman looked at the two sheets, her gaze softening just a touch. She turned to the clerk, record as additional evidence. Then she faced Rachel again, her voice calm but leaving no gap. Defendant, do you wish to make a statement before the court goes into deliberation? Rachel tilted her head back, laughing without sound. She glanced around, searching for a familiar nod, but Victor had already averted his eyes, and Collins was absent. She gripped the edge of the table, panting. You don't understand. I held this house together. I was the one who kept it standing. David did not answer. He simply placed a hand on Elena's back, patting gently. Turner closed his file folder, signaling his part was done. Maria handed over the USB, and Lucy submitted another sealed envelope. Evidence of cash transactions connected to Sheriff Dalton. Judge Coleman gave a curt nod, closing the file in front of her. The courtroom felt drained of air. She leaned forward, gavel in hand, her eyes sweeping the room. In the back row, a chair scraped faintly, then stopped. No one spoke. No one dared to breathe too loud. The court will recess for 10 minutes. After that, the verdict will be read. Before the gavel even struck wood, the entire chamber had fallen into absolute stillness. Every gaze was fixed on Judge Patricia Coleman's high bench, as though waiting for a door either to slam shut or to open wide. The sound of the gavel echoed as Judge Patricia Coleman returned. She sat down, looked to both sides, and read firmly. The court accepts the entire petition for child protection. Rachel Reynolds is convicted of child abuse and falsifying records. Gregory Collins is arrested for forging medical documents. Victor Hale is under investigation as an accomplice. Sheriff Harold Dalton is in custody for taking bribes. The child Elena is placed in the full custody of her father, David Carter. The restraining order imposed by the defendants is hereby annulled. The courtroom fell silent. David squeezed his daughter's hand. Elena looked up, her eyes still wet but no longer avoiding his gaze. Maria Santos stepped forward and shook David's hand with a firm grip. "Take the girl home." Turner nodded, his voice warm. "You walked the right path." From the back row, Linda Green quietly wiped her eyes. Grace Miller stood to one side, looked at Elena, and gave a faint smile. In the days that followed, the local paper ran a short article. They mentioned Detective Maria Santos for her persistence. They mentioned Linda for speaking up at the right moment. They thanked Grace for providing the final piece. David read in silence, then folded the paper away. He was busier now with a new schedule. School drop-offs, meals on time, therapy sessions, and evenings without the sound of locked doors. One afternoon, David took Elena to meet Dr. Leah Simmons, a child psychologist and speech therapist, about 35 years old, with a slow and gentle voice. She handed David a small notebook and said, "We'll start with simple words. Father and daughter will learn together." Leah signed slowly, then let the two of them repeat it. Elena watched her father's hands, smiled when he missed the rhythm, then guided his fingers into the right position. David laughed with her, laughing like someone relearning how to breathe. In the evenings, instead of papers and meetings, David sat at the kitchen table. Elena pointed at her cup of milk and signed, "Thank you." David answered, "You're welcome." Two small gestures, yet they changed the rhythm of the house. He understood then that the distance between them was not silence, but fear. When fear retreated, silence itself became a gentle language. A week later, the community center held a gathering. They invited those who had helped to share a few words. Maria spoke briefly, then stepped aside. Linda brought an apple pie. Grace arrived late, her hands still trembling as she held the microphone. "I've been silent for too long. This time, I choose to tell the truth." The room broke into applause, not loud, but steady and warm. Elena walked beside her father. She held a large drawing wrapped in cardboard. When it was her turn, she opened the drawing. A house drawn with crayons, a red roof, a yellow sun, two people standing close together on the porch. At the bottom was a neat line of letters, "Home." David bent down to take it, his hand resting on the roof. He drew in a deep breath, as if holding an entire season of sunlight in his chest. After the ceremony, father and daughter sat on the steps of the community center. People passed slowly. A light breeze moved. David turned to her, asking aloud, then repeating in sign language to be sure. "What do you want the most?" Elena looked straight into her father's eyes. She signed slowly, without trembling. "A family, without darkness." David held his daughter, holding her for a long time. He heard the sound of her heartbeat, small but steady. He knew he had stepped out of that room of guilt from years ago and closed the door behind him, not with a lock, but with a new choice made every single day. A few weeks later, therapy sessions continued regularly. Leah reminded him, "Keep naming the emotions. When she is afraid, don't correct her right away. Hold her hand first." David nodded, learning how to hold her hand at the right moment and let go at the right moment. Elena drew even more. Her drawings showed playgrounds, dining tables, and the word "dad" built with blocks of color. In one drawing, there was Detective Maria with her hair tied neatly, Linda holding a tray of cookies, Grace standing at the door with a smile. Each drawing was a brick, paving the way back home. On the last night of the month, David placed the home drawing on the wall across from the dining table. He poured milk, added a bowl of cereal for Elena. She sat down, looked at the drawing, then at her father. David signed, slow but steady. "I'm here." Elena held his hand, pulled it closer, and signed. "I'm safe." David smiled. A smile that wasn't forced. It stayed on his face for a long time. He understood that justice had come to open the path, but healing had to keep moving forward with his own hands. Before bedtime, Elena touched her father's arm, as if calling for his attention. She looked up, her eyes bright, and signed once more, clear and firm. "I love you." David froze for a moment, then wrapped his arms around her. Outside, the night was still dark, but no longer heavy. Inside the house, a small lamp glowed just enough to light up two faces turned confidently toward the brightness. The story closes with the light of justice and a father's embrace wide enough to protect all the years of silence. From fear, Elena learned to speak with her eyes, with a trembling piece of paper, while David relearned how to be a father, to listen, to stand up, and to take responsibility. On the other side, the sweet mask finally fell. The manipulative, deceitful ones had to pay the price. The message is very clear. The wicked will be punished, the good will be rewarded. A family is not a place of locked doors, but a place where no one is kept in the dark. Looking back, we ask ourselves, what would you do if you noticed a tiny cry for help, like a piece of paper with a drawing of a barn? Would you have the courage to speak up for a neighbor's child when something wasn't right kept happening? Do you wish for more healing stories like this? I am the channel's host, and I truly want to hear your thoughts. Which moment touched you most, the moment David signed "I love you" to his daughter? Or when Elena wrote, "I trust you, Dad"? Have you ever faced a moment when you had to choose between fear and the truth? Please share with me, so we can lift each other up. That is why this channel exists. If this story brought you a little warmth, please leave a comment, share it with someone who needs it, and hit follow. I will continue to bring you heartwarming stories and emotional stories about family, courage, and faith, because light only grows when we kindle it together. Are you doing okay? Have you eaten well today and taken time to rest? Remember to take care of yourself too.